Hey everyone, Antonio Scatina here, Vice President of Business Development at Phase 3 Search. So this is the second of our 5 segment videos that we've extracted from our recent live event, Best Practices for World-Class Culture. Now in this video segment, we're going to hear our 4 expert panelists define authenticity, articulation, and purpose of culture. And you'll first hear our panelists start by describing how authenticity in a company's culture is paramount. They're going to describe how culture evolves as companies evolve, and it never remains static. Now, one of the great insights that we pulled out of this segment is how one of our experts described how leadership being authentic is also a very important part of culture. And this is about leadership being out in front of the workforce and being vulnerable, just like everyone else. Another big point here is it's not just what values you believe best describe your culture, but the why. The why these values describe your culture over other values that you could have picked, and how you articulate and how you define them for yourselves. And lastly, one of the biggest takeaways I think from this segment is that culture is not a human resources responsibility. It's everybody's responsibility. In fact, human resource leaders are employees too, and they wish to have the same kind of experiences just like every other employee in the organization. So culture is really everybody's responsibility, and it's not really just an HR job. So please join us, listen on as our experts begin to explore the definition here, talk a little bit more about culture as we dig deeper into getting into the blockers. And again, please leave a comment for us. We enjoy bringing you these types of videos, and we want to get your feedback about this or other topics. And with that, enjoy the video, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks again.
And that is a beautiful lead-in, Brad, so thank you very much. To our next point, which is really talking about the talking piece. So authenticity, definition, articulation, and purpose. Now, each of these ideas was kind of seeded by all of you, and I wasn't really able to bundle them together under a singular word, hence why we've got a multi-statement. But who wants to tackle some of these things? Because it's easy to list these as words, but what does that really mean? What do we see that as?
Well, I can go first because I felt pretty strongly about the authenticity piece. So in my career and my journey as a leader, we've often talked about culture, and I've been across lots of different industries, not just biotech. And for me, hearing people say, well, so-and-so does this, or this company does that. Why can't we do this? And I always stepped back to say, but is that us? Is that really true of who we are or who we want to be, right? So culture is also an evolution. It's not a stagnant thing that just sits in one period of time. Well, as the company evolves, so does your culture. Good, bad, and ugly, as we've all seen, but hopefully for the good. So to me, one of the most important things is the first two around, well, they're all connected, but around authenticity and being real to who the organization is as it is today. Define it, be transparent about it, even if it's not perfect, because it's never going to be perfect. But identify what that is today and where you want to go. And does where you want to go make sense with your purpose and your vision and your mission and all the things that we just talked about? Because you can't be another company. You need to be true to who you are and where you are in the journey, as we talked about before. So I'll stop there and one of you can jump in.
I'll happily jump in because similar to you, Deborah, this is something I'm really passionate about. I agree with what you're saying. The only piece that I think is a little bit different in terms of what we're doing at Tessera, it's really around leadership being authentic, because that's where it all starts, right? So if you just think about everything we've been through in the last 3 years, I mean, you can pick your poison here, right? The pandemic, social injustice, new generations coming into the workforce. The days of leaders sitting in an ivory tower, it's done, right? It really takes now leaders being vulnerable, being out in front of the employees, knowing what they're doing, right? Like that's the best way to engage. When employees see the leaders being authentic, it starts to bleed through that whole organization. And that really creates that culture where people feel like they can be themselves and really belong.
I think having words sometimes around what we want this to feel like You know, everybody says, tell me about your culture. And, you know, the easy answer is to say the culture is evolving, because every person that comes to an organization is going to add and change the culture. But I think for other HR leaders, I always tell folks it's nice to have some definition and some kind of, you know, goal or beacon that the company might not look like that today. Company may be 5 people, the company may be 10,000 people, but when you know what it is for this particular company you want to create, and then you put some definitions around it, you can, as you're moving down your path, if you're coming off of that trail with your definitions, you're able to kind of guide yourselves back through. Also, as you're hiring people, you know, we have people remote in all parts of the country. So if you're California or Connecticut, and you know, the spirit of the company is entrepreneurial, empowerment, passion, and fun, we're going to have those in both areas, I think is helpful as, again, a definition for some underpinning. So the entirety of the company pulls together and, you know, things aren't isolated as we're hiring people in remote areas as well.
And I guess, you know, from my perspective, you know, I think a lot about articulation and definition. So if I said to everybody on the phone, what's an expensive dinner for 2? We all know what the word expensive means, but I guarantee you I will end up in a very different restaurant, not just because we all like different cuisines, but because we interpret it differently, right? And so, you know, one of the challenges, like I remember when we got the group together at B to talk about designing our culture, because you can be intentional in kind of the way that you do it. And my personal belief is that bringing everybody into that conversation is the way to go. Because, you know, I've seen a lot of organizations where you have an executive team go off and they pull together the culture and the values and they bring it back. And what you end up getting is a culture of compliance. People will try to do those things because they want to be rewarded and recognized, but you don't really get the level of ownership. And, you know, we'll probably get to that in just a little bit. But I think, you know, who doesn't want to be innovative? Who doesn't want to be collaborative? Who doesn't want to have quality in their organization, right? And what they do? Who doesn't want to have excellence, right? Like, so when you sit down and you look at all of the values that you could espouse, the really hard part about it is to try to get a collective understanding of why do we value something the most relative to something else? Because we have to choose a smaller set of values. Even if we value all of those things to some degree, we have to make a choice about what those are. And that actually ends up being a lot harder conversation than you think it will be. But it's a really important one. And I think it's a really rich discussion. And people start to grapple with it a little bit more. And then they start to kind of come in with this kind of understanding of, oh, we're going to have this fuzzy HR conversation about, you know, kind of people and culture. And they come out of it being like, whoa, you know, I really learned something about my colleagues. They learned, I like to say, the genes or the values that were conserved across their teammates, right? And they learned the ones that were distinct. And we actually had people talk about what those are and what their definitions would be. So it's a really rich and actually harder discussion. We try to not make it like lawyers pulling together a contract, because that just makes me want to shove bamboo shoots at my fingernails. But you know, there is power in being explicit. I'll give that to my legal friends.
So can I jump in on that,
Please,
Alex,
Debra.
before you do? I think it's a good segue to number 3. When Brad just said, we're going to have an HR conversation, funny coming from the HR people, right? Culture is not an HR responsibility. It's, you know, often we're there to provide the tools. I say this to our organization all the time. We don't own it ourselves. In fact, we're people that want to experience it too. You know, I am an employee first and foremost, period, full stop. I want to have the same experiences that others do. We help provide the facilitation. Sometimes we have to mediate, but it is not ours to own, as all of us said. The organization owns it. And I 100% agree with Brad, where it needs to be a bottoms up, a tops down, everyone in the middle, kind of a hurricane that happens, but it's not an HR responsibility. And so for those of you on the phone who are not in HR, first, thank your HR people, because we've had it rough the last few years. But also remember that you're part of the definition of this, the articulation, and absolutely walking the walk.
You're absolutely right, Debra, that, you know, the ownership piece is vital. And I think that that also goes with congruent action.